Welcome to the Reeves Gun Club podcast, where we discuss all things firearms and shooting sports. I'm your host, Antonio Higgs, and I'm excited to bring you the latest news, tips, tricks, and historic discussions about guns in the minority community. We're a pro-Second Amendment community of responsibly armed citizens, and we take pride in learning and sharing our knowledge within the community. So whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out, this podcast is for you. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the psychological impact of guns in our community. Do guns create a sense of safety or a cycle of fear? We'll be exploring this topic with experts in the field and hearing from community members who have been impacted by gun violence. Stay tuned for an insightful and thought-provoking conversation. On this panel, I have Eric Murphy, Kia Gland, and Sean Campbell. Welcome you all to this discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, great to be here.
So I'm gonna jump it off with a serious question to see how get y'all take on this. So with all the data how it's pointing now, showing that black people commit over 54% of gun violence here in the U.S., why are we encouraging more black people to purchase firearms?
Antonio, let me ask you a question. Where does that statistic come from?
It comes from the National Gun Violence Data Reports. Mm-hmm. Another federal gun violence report. So it floats between 54 and 60%.
Okay.
Now, where they're actually pulling that data from, I can't speak to the actual raw data itself.
So it's not the CDC or it's a semi-governmental.
It is semi-governmental, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, since I opened up my mouth first, let me go ahead and answer. My answer. Lately, it seems like it's been increasing safety since 2020 when we had the uprisings and the pandemic. It was encouraging to see black folks take the initiative and take their own security into their hands. But I think as of late, it's hard to say if it's making us feel unsafe. Some of us, yes. But the numbers have been rising that a lot of us are saying we're not going to feel unsafe anymore. So we're going to own a firearm and hopefully train with that firearm.
I agree. I think in particular the female population among African Americans, we have a tendency to feel as if we are constantly ignored. When we go missing, no one cares. No one looks for us. We're single mothers. We're outliving our husbands by 10 to 20 years. So we often find ourselves in a very vulnerable situation. And during this whole recent insurge of media-driven coverage for crimes involving African Americans, I believe that is driving us to purchase more guns and learn how to protect ourselves.
I guess I have to take a look at what both of the other panelists said. Number one, we always have to evaluate the source of information, right?
Right, absolutely.
And so if the source of information is coming from the same source that labeled the Black Panthers a terrorist group, but didn't label the Ku Klux Klan a terrorist group until somewhere in the 2000s?
Recently.
Right, recently.
Very recently.
I question that, especially when it's anything negative that's said about, or could be construed to be negative, about people of color, black, brown, whatever. So that's number one. As far as does it create a sense of fear, I don't think guns in and of themselves create a sense of fear. I think it's the media machine that is behind guns that creates the sense of fear, particularly amongst those who don't own guns. Mm-hmm. So for those people that don't own guns, many of them are looking to various sources for information. And they're not necessarily examining the history of those sources. Typically, people give credibility to sources of information that are what? Big and old. So if you're a big organization like a CNN or a BBC, if you're an old organization, or an old group like Harvard is almost 400 years old now. I think it's 387 years old. Now, all of a sudden, you somehow have credibility, particularly in the minds of people who don't own firearms, right? And a lot of it is, too, because people just don't want to do their own research. So they're okay with leaning heavily on these other groups. So when these other groups put out a message about guns that promotes fear, I think that is really what drives any fear, or the majority of fear that's in the community. The other thing is also, I think you have to really identify which community we're talking about, because popular culture would have you think that the black community is primarily an urban community. But there's a large black community that's rural. You know, you go down into Columbus, Georgia, you go out to Augusta, Georgia. Macon, Georgia, and you find a lot of black people. Birmingham, Alabama, I think is 70% black, right? Jackson, Mississippi is close to 60, 70% black. So these are rural areas. And that rural community has a different view on guns than the urban community in a lot of ways. So, you know, the black community is not a monolith, particularly when it comes to guns. But I really do think that the fear that people do have, most of it, if not all of it, is principally driven by these, you know, large entities that have control over platforms and messaging.
Okay. So with that being said, should we not own any guns? Because I use an instance coming from a rural community. So in a rural community, we were faced with two stages of fear. So we were worried about the perception of us as black people from the white community, because how we were being seen in the news as we were the ones committing the majority of the crime, but also from us as in the black community that we don't want to put ourselves in the spotlight by owning a weapon. So we'd rather just stay low and dry and don't have anybody looking at us incorrectly by owning a gun.
Okay.
Well, that's a you know, I'm originally from Los Angeles, California, and the perception has always been in LA.
And y'all have some strict gun laws in LA.
Yeah, in California, yeah, absolutely. Their gun laws are ridiculous. The perception was, if you owned a firearm, well, what do you need a firearm? What do you need a gun for? What are you doing that you need a gun? Instead of, I need a firearm to protect myself. Well, why do you need to protect yourself? So it's always been that perception that if I had a gun with a lot of black folks from places like the Northeast and from I'd say Southern California, but California in general, that if you had a gun, then you were up to no good. And it wasn't until I moved here to Georgia 26 years ago or so that it, you know, and I owned a firearm in California too. So I was already on that train. When I moved here and found out that I can actually carry a firearm to protect myself, that was, for lack of a better term, liberating.
I grew up in the 80s in the DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia. At one point, DC was the murder capital of the world, if not definitely the United States. And as a child growing up in my preteens and teens, I remember, you know, being at the kitchen table, doing my homework and watching the news or whatever my mother had on the television. Every single day, we looked to the news, and this was before cable with hundreds of channels. You just had your typical ABC, CBS, NBC, and your local Fox affiliate or something like that. And every night it was how many young black teens were killed. So growing up in the 80s, you know, gun violence was guns were synonymous with violence. So there was never a narrative given to us about using guns for protection. Never, ever. And you were taught that the police was there to do that part. But now as an adult, I find that the police, they get there after the crime has been committed, and they take notes and then they write their police report. It is very rare that they actually catch a crime when it is actually being committed. But it's an indoctrination we've had all of our young lives. It started from, you know, being a kid and watching television.
Indoctrination is a great word, because that's exactly what it was.
And to your point, the scenario that you posited earlier in regard to having concerns about how you were viewed for having a firearm versus the fear of oppression or violence from other groups. This is what I would say to that. How do 25 people keep 350 people oppressed on a 500-acre piece of land? One word, gun. So if you're that worried, you should be more worried about that than you are how people view you, in my opinion.
Yeah, because it doesn't matter.
You're right.
And so, quite frankly, the last people that I really care about how they view me is the individual that's trying to see me in chains.
Right.
That's the last people. I could really care less. I really could care less. They want to see me in chains, whether that be cuffs or with a rope around my neck.
And
so,
right, to Brother Sean's point, Black folks in our positions, I just say that because we own firearms. We believe in defending ourselves. We're stuck between, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm following what you're saying. We're stuck in between. I'm defending myself from enemies, foreign and domestic. I know that there are people in my community, unfortunately, and I don't even like to say this because this is really hard to say. Some of those people ain't for me. All skin folk ain't kinfolk.
It's the truth, though.
But to his point, that's the thing that I have a hard time conveying to folks that look like me. I don't ever want to be in chains. I've never been in chains. I don't want to be in chains. I don't want our people to go back into chains. So that's one of the reasons why I, like Sean, give 0 Fs about what somebody that doesn't look like me, says about my firearm ownership.
Yeah, that's a conversation that we have a lot, especially coming from a rural county, is that we growing up, and I know I may look young, but growing up, we had certain parts of our town that we couldn't go into because it was like predominantly white. And if we went over there, that we were potentially some harm would happen to us. But even still, in knowing that, we were never encouraged to own firearms. So once I started purchasing firearms and I took safety training and whatnot, my parents and even some of my grandparents at the time before they passed away, they were still the same way. They was like, why would you purchase that? Why would you do something to potentially cause harm to you or have somebody threaten you in a way because you own that and because they're scared of you to come and do harm to you and your family? But
to me, that's a fundamental flaw, in my opinion, in the thought paradigm in our community.
But it's what's been done intentionally, though, because of the media.
It's been done intentionally, but at a certain point, it's self-inflicted. Right? Like, for instance, we're in Atlanta, Georgia right now. The Glock factory is right off 285.
It's the truth. I've been there.
Okay, the Glock factory. The Daniel Defense, which for a long time had the SOCOM contracts, who makes some of the best rifles on the planet Earth, is about 30 minutes short of Savannah off 16 in Black Creek, Georgia, or whatever it's called. Mm. So the access is there. And particularly being in the Deep South, I'm not from the South, I'm from the Northeast. But particularly in the South, where people have such an intimate and direct connection with the visceral and overt oppression that we discuss so much, right? You would think that we might say, okay, at a certain point, if we fail to adapt or fail to evolve, we pride ourselves on being so many different things. We talk about our community as having so much potential and, there's so much intellect and wisdom in our communities. Well, knowledge without application is a waste. Mm-hmm. So, we've seen it. Again, we've seen 25 people oppress 350 people on a 500-acre piece of land. We've seen that. When you drive through certain parts of Georgia today, you still see cotton fields. Mm-hmm. So, if you wanted a reminder, there it is. And so, as far as that's concerned, we need to start conditioning ourselves to think about things from a more combative perspective. The docility approach has not worked for us. And I know that there's going to be people that, talk about Martin Luther King and, the nonviolence movement. And you know what? That's great. I don't have anything negative to say about Martin Luther King and that movement. But what I will say is, I believe that that movement was only effective because the federal government knew that Malcolm was the alternative.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they had a choice between people following Malcolm versus people following Martin, they chose to incentivize
I never
people
thought
to
of it
follow
like that.
Martin.
That is a great point.
Yeah, I never looked at it like that.
Right. So, I mean, let's think about it. Let's say the year is 1952, and we're all sitting here at the lunch counter, right? And I look at you and I say, hey, you see that whites only water fountain across the street? We're going to go across the street, and we're going to drink from that water fountain. Now, when they spray us with the hoses and sick the dogs on us, guess what we're going to do? We're going to sing a song.
Yeah, I'm not singing those songs.
I'm an idea guy, so I know people come up with all types of crazy ideas, but who was the person that was there that thought that was a good idea and said, yeah, that sounds like a plan? Yeah. No. But again, the docility situation was only effective because, like I said, Malcolm was the alternative.
Well, they added biblical aspects to that too. Well, to always say that, because Jesus and everybody else.
Well, the Bible has been weaponized.
Was a preacher.
Right.
He was.
But in speaking to various members of his family, I've heard, they always used to say Michael, they reference him as Michael because that was his birth name. They talk about how, behind closed doors, he had more sentiments similar to Malcolm than most people know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
he owned weapons.
With his thoughts on Vietnam.
Right.
And that one of his last interviews or speeches was, hey, write the check about reparations.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, it's difficult to really understand how people can still ascribe logically to tactics of docility when we've been met with nothing but tactics of hostility and we've lost. Like, let's just go ahead and be clear about that. And I know that now this is going to be unpopular. There's going to be some people in the chats let's be real.
Oh yeah, the chat is always more. What about gun violence in the black community?
That's great. But okay, there's gun violence in the black community. There's going to be violence everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. There's going to be violence everywhere. So even more reason. I don't care who's standing behind the barrel of the gun that's pointed at me. I don't care what color they are, what creed they are, age, sex, gender. I don't care. And because I can't control what they do, I can only control what I do. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go ahead and put myself in the best position to defend what is most precious to me in most instances, which is my life or the life of my loved ones. I mean, that's really what it is. I mean, I've always said that gun ownership really, in my opinion, should be a basic human right. Mm-hmm. Because if human life is a human right, then certainly the most effective way to defend it on a microscopic and individual level should be considered a basic human right also. Mm-hmm. So, like I said, the docility and the way that we think in our community in that paradigm, I think that's where we're flawed. And I mean, it manifests itself in so many different ways. We've come up in a society to where people synonymize truth with being a radical. Mm-hmm. You say something that is truthful, now all of a sudden, oh, he's a Panther, or he's, he goes to the Dr. Umar School of Economics, right? that's really what it is. And they say that in a pejorative way, right? When all you're really talking about is truth. Yeah. And so, we have to first take accountability, right? Which is going to require us to be uncomfortable, right? It's going to require us to be uncomfortable. I had this conversation with my nephew maybe a month ago. He was talking about what he learned in school in Black History Month. I was like, they tell you we was losers? No, he didn't tell. What you mean they didn't tell you? We're losers. We lost. We had foreign people that came on our shores and kicked our ass and continued to kick our ass ever since. And we have done very little to evolve. We're losers. It sucks to say because you have so much messaging out there that teaches you about, pride and all of this stuff. Okay, that's great. There are
what
things
we've overcome, yeah.
Yeah, listen, and there are things that our community has done that we should most certainly be proud of. But fundamentally and foundationally, I'm here having this conversation with you because my ancestors got their ass kicked. Mm-hmm. That's why I'm here. They got their ass kicked. And it happens, right? It happens.
I think what angers me the most, though, knowing it happens, they've yet to apologize.
I wouldn't apologize if I was them. Do you see the lion apologizing to the zebra?
They
when
apologize to everybody else.
Huh?
They apologize to everyone else.
That ain't my business. What they do to everybody else, what they do to everybody else and for everybody else is not my business. If anything, I shouldn't have that expectation because for the last half a millennia, we've been treated differently than everybody else. So
I think they apologize to everyone else because everyone else understands the power behind their dollar, and they will remove it if they are not respected. We have not properly demanded our respect. You hear out now, put some respect on my name. It's a little bit deeper than that. I think, how about stop spending billions of dollars on stuff that doesn't matter? Stop continuing to shop in the places of the people that can't stand you. You know that they don't like you. You know that they don't want to deal with you, but you continue to pour back into their communities. That's why we do not get an apology, because no matter what they do, we're still going to be there.
Well, what about the fear when it comes to, and I don't want to get too political, but they try to put fear in your heart where if you don't vote for a certain candidate, then you're going to put that vote towards somebody else.
accountability.
Indoctrination.
Accountability. So let's put that out there too. As far as the president of the United States is concerned, your vote don't count.
I wasn't even referencing the president. I'm talking about local too.
But that's what most people talk about. When you see it on the TV, rock the vote,
that's the big
the
sexy.
biggest election, they talking about the president. And when people want to go ahead and blame their ills about the country and the way it's going, let's blame Trump or let's blame Biden or let's blame whoever is in there.
I blame them both.
Right. But either way, the fact of the matter is that your vote didn't count. This is not a country where the popular vote elects the president. Donald Trump lost the election by over 2 million votes. And he was still the president. You lost an election by 20 Georgia domes. You lost it by the city of fucking Dallas. And you still won? So as far as, scaring me that my vote doesn't, scaring me if I don't vote for a particular candidate, can't scare, don't. Look, a friend of mine told me one time, he said, and I've adopted this, when Jimmy Carter was president, I was living in the projects. Yeah? When Reagan became president, people was in the projects. When Bush was president, people was in the projects. Bill Clinton was in there. The same people were still in the projects. So it didn't really matter who was in the chair, right? It didn't really matter. So whether it was, whether they were, elephants or donkeys, red or blue, it didn't matter. Those same people were still in there. So, accountability. Like, let's go ahead and be real about what actually happens. Like you said, the local elections. People need to spend more time voting to find out who the judge is that's sentencing you to life. And let's go ahead and put this out there. I get tired of people talking about the importance of voting, but then try and skip jury duty.
Right.
Yeah.
Because most of them don't even understand that the principal purpose for people fighting for you to have the right to vote was because they got tired of seeing black men getting tried by all white juries, and the jury pool was selected from the voter registration logs. That's why they wanted to keep you off of it. They wanted to keep you off of it so you couldn't be on this jury. So you going out and voting for a president where your vote doesn't count, but then calling me, asking me how you can get out of jury duty makes no sense. So let's put that out there too, so the people in the chat room gonna have something else to talk about. But that's the reality.
There's a saying that I've always heard: all politics is local. Mm-hmm. And whatever you do locally can affect nationally. Mm-hmm. But we need to tend to what's happening in. I'm a resident of Clayton County, and it's predominantly black. Mm-hmm. Okay. We just had a trial.
And congrats for that trial too, convicting.
Yes. That would have not happened in, say, Fayette County, which is right next to us. I fully and wholly believe that would not have ever happened.
So the people that's listening, what woman are you referring to? Or what case are you talking about?
The case of the young 21-year-old young white lady happened upon a hit and run accident.
Mm-hmm. I think her name is Hannah Payton.
Yeah, that's what it. This was maddening to me. I haven't had somebody hit and run on me. I can understand, but you don't insert yourself into a situation and try and Zimmerman the issue to coin a phrase. Mm-hmm. Okay, the person that hit and ran, she drove and cornered the elderly black man. Mm-hmm. Somehow or another, a gun was introduced to the situation, and she shot that man. And she, under the guise of, quote, I was trying to defend myself. So, of course, thankfully, because it's still, even in a predominantly black county, it could have went sideways.
Yeah, it took 4.5 years, but yeah.
Yeah, it took 4.5 years, and they convicted her. I forget the actual charges.
Well, hold on, are y'all familiar with that case?
I'm a lawyer here, so I'm very much.
I didn't know you was a lawyer. Yeah. What about you, Kia?
I'm vaguely familiar with it. I believe that the 911 operator told her repeatedly, if not at least once, do not engage. And she decided to take it upon herself. And that's, in my opinion, a sense of entitlement. Mm-hmm. When you've never been in a situation where you're constantly berated for your everyday actions, you have a sense of entitlement. No one ever probably made her feel like if you, since she's a female, females can't talk here. What are you doing dressed like that? What are you doing in this store? Men are only allowed in this store. You gonna buy something, girl? She would not have asserted herself. But because she's never had her butt whooped, by society, she's thinking, I could do what I want to do. I'm going to help my fellow man. And she done helped herself into a jail cell.
So is that to go back to the topic itself, though, is that the safety net that she has as an individual?
So I'm going to say something to Brother Sean, and I'm going to bring it back to the local election. But anyway, just really quick. That is the local stuff that we need to concentrate on. Yeah, now, I'm not saying vote for every black person that's thrown in front of you.
No.
Absolutely not.
No.
But that trial, again, would not have happened in a county right next to us had it not been for the local, just paying attention to your local judges, to your prosecutors, hell, to the dog catcher. Mm-hmm. Those are the people that affect you more than Trump or Biden, though, again, I have my ire with both of them. But the sheriff, we ain't got to talk about the sheriff in Clayton County. But those are the things that are most important to you. Your taxes, your taxes, where they go, all that. But I wanted to reference something that this brother was saying about the 50 people and the 350 of us. The reason that wouldn't have happened that wouldn't have happened in a vacuum. Okay, 50 people with guns, 350 people on a 500 acre plot of land. The reason that also was able to happen because there was a system in place.
Right. There was a fear.
There was 50 more next to him, and then 50 more, and then 50 more. But it wasn't just those 200 people with firearms. It was a system that told them, that helped them, that facilitates even to this day that happens. And we have not moved past, what was the word, brother? That the docile.
The docility philosophy, yeah.
Of it. And it affects us to this day. You know, before, this is not a new problem with firearms in the black community. Like I said, I mentioned, and like she mentioned, in the 80s, I was in South Central Los Angeles. She was in the DMV.
I was in Brooklyn, New York.
And you was, and even, man, ground zero for all of us. You know?
Exactly.
My community wasn't that bad. I mean, we had to worry about white people. So it wasn't that bad. It's bad now. But it wasn't bad back then.
I mean, the thing about it is, let's really look at the crux of the issue, right? Mm-hmm. What gives a government power?
It's people.
It's people, yeah.
No.
The money. I'm just throwing
those are mediums. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that the principal idea of government is about forcible compulsion. The only reason why you go into a courtroom and you really have to obey the judge is not because of the judge. It's because of the sheriff's deputy that's his bailiff that's got the .40 caliber on his hip and the handcuff keys.
It's the same reason I pay taxes, because I don't want to go to jail.
Exactly. So it's about forcible compulsion, right? So if I can compel you to do things forcibly, then I win. The way that they compel you to do things forcibly is with that firearm. Mm-hmm. That is the source of it, forcible compulsion. So at its root and at its core, forcible compulsion, principally based in firearm possession and to a certain extent superior tactics, right, is where this lies. I mean, when you look at it and you say, police officers are basically death dealers. Mm-hmm. They have a lot of discretion, and they can wield life and death on civilians at any time. Now, we talk about this particular case, and we talk about her sense of entitlement, but where does that sense of entitlement come from? That sense of entitlement comes from, a lot of times, how she was trained, right? And the reason why that training happens the way it does is because of a concept that many people may not be aware of, so I'll introduce it to them. It's a concept called governmental immunity. Okay? Governments are essentially corporations, right? And corporations speak one language, which is money. Okay? So what Georgia in particular has done is they have passed laws that make governmental entities, particularly the police, virtually immune from civil lawsuits. Okay? They don't really care about this police officer going to jail. She's one of many. They'll have a new crop of rookies coming in. It's not a big deal.
She's not a police officer.
Whatever it is, any police officer that does any of this,
right?
Because that's a lot of times the issues about violence in our community. It comes from police a lot of times. Mm-hmm. We talk, and we talk about that a lot, like police brutality, police this. We had the whole situation during the pandemic with George Floyd, right? Mm-hmm. And all of that. So you from LA, Rodney King, right? All of these different things. This is another situation to where you have forcible compulsion through a group that has insulated themselves from accountability. Mm. So they say, look, you can't sue us except in a very, 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 very small set of circumstances, which most things do not fall into. So if you want to stop a lot of that, now you stop governmental immunity. Like I tell people all the time, I can change the entire course of a law enforcement department's philosophy and training with a $250 million lawsuit.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Bass Reeves Gun Club podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and family. Don't forget to like and comment on the show to let us know what you think. And if you're interested in learning more about firearm safety, proficiency, and the shooting sports, and you're in the Atlanta area, please consider joining the Bass Reeves Gun Club. We're a pro-Second Amendment community of responsibly armed citizens, and we take pride in learning and sharing our knowledge within the community. You can find more about us and how to join at bassreevesgc.com. bassreeves.com. That's Bass Reeves, G as in Gary, C as in cat.com. Remember, stay fearless, knowing no master but duty. I am Antonio Hicks, and it's been my privilege to produce and edit this podcast, bringing these important conversations to life. But the conversation doesn't have to end here. If you're curious about more stories and insights in the avenue of politics, technology, and gaming, I invite you to join me on my own podcast, PTG TV. On PTG TV, we dive deep into a variety of topics, exploring the intricacies of our world with a mix of humor, seriousness, and everything in between. It's a space where we challenge norms, celebrate diversity, and foster a community of curious minds and open hearts. You can find PTG TV on all major podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Just search for PTG TV and hit subscribe. All opinions expressed by the podcast hosts, participants, and creators are their own and do not reflect the opinions of NAGA, the Bass Reeves Gun Club, which is the Atlanta chapter of NAGA or affiliated gun ranges, gun clubs, or companies.